If we can get that wider on the...
Yes, it's
3 online.
Kia ora, Chair, and kia ora to those who are joining by Zoom. I'm not sure whether you'll be able to see unless we share the screen, but Annalee's just going to put up a waiata. But what we'll do is we'll just, over the next couple of meetings, learn the words. And this was composed by my niece for us across Hawke's Bay. It's called Pūrākau. And it's a waiata that relates to our environment and where we aspire to be in the future. So there are the words up there. What I'll do is I'll go through them, and Annalee will share this with all of you so you've got it. And we'll also share the waiata version of it so you can practice in the shower. And so that next time we come together, Henewai is going to lead us with this waiata. This is one where, on occasions where we go to other places or where we join with the other councils, is where this is the waiata for us that we do in relation to what our major kaupapa is about, the taiao, and about the environment.
Pity, do you realise that Ngahiwi has banned Rex from singing on Marais?
Is it that bad?
Oh, was that bad?
This has got a dirge sort of monotone to it, so it'll work. It'll work. So if I go through the words for you, and if you repeat after me, I'll go slowly, and we can do both sides. Is that okay, Chair?
Yeah, no, it's excellent. It's an excellent. I just read it's really good.
So I'll start off, and then you kick in behind me, and I'll try and break the long sentences into brackets. Pūrākau e tū, mai nei, e piki ki runga rā, kia mārama ahau, kairaro, ko te matau, te whakatikanga, ake ki runga rā, ka titi whā, te rehutai, te ara I, whanatu aira. Ko te kura ki ahau, he tohu noa, ake ki te kura. I te rehutai. Te whakawhiti o te rā. Te whakaai o whenua. Oki muri mai. Au ki te iwi. Te ara I whanatu aira. Now, I think the right-hand side there, we can just go through that together. On the path most travelled, behold the grove of trees. I ascend so that I might see clearly. Below is Te Matau. And as I arise to go forth, a light shines through the sea spray upon the path of the myriads. I retain this plume as a symbol of the legacy beyond the spray of the sea, causing the sun to shine and spreading peace over the land. I now return to the people upon the trodden path. Are we share screening, Annalee?
I've seen it to them.
Excellent. And the last part I'll just read. This is by my niece Tweety Nawehi. At some stage in the near future, she will come with her mother and also with her grandmother, so that she can be in amongst us just to check and see how we're going. So this waiata highlights the legacy of our loved ones, the legacy that sees health return to our beautiful environment, Te Matua Maui, Hawke's Bay. This waiata takes us on a journey as we ascend above the trees, taking in the Hawke's Bay panorama. The kura is a metaphor for the work that we have yet to fulfil. Nā tuirina wehi I tito, tuirina composer. Kia ora tātou.
Paddy, and thank you very much. And once again, welcome to everyone here. Welcome to the people on Zoom, Tania, Karanga, and John. Is John there?
Oh, John
John's over there.
John.
is three.
Okay. And to all of our staff and to everybody here today, thank you for attending. Now, we have a really long day today, Without prompting, Leanne has put times next to everything on the run sheet. And I think that's a really excellent idea, and we're going to try and keep to those times. So can we just have a little bit of discipline around that and just try and keep, because otherwise we won't get through this agenda, and we will miss stuff in our workshop, which we so regularly do, important stuff at the end of the day. So if we can try and keep tight, I'd appreciate that, and we're not making a great start because we started late. So, are there any notices?
Yes, Chair. Oh, no, sorry, mine items.
Yeah, mine
Wrong
items,
ones.
yeah. And apologies, we have apologies today from Charles. Nikki's via Zoom, but is she on the Zoom?
She's on the Zoom.
Oh, there she is. Sorry, Nikki, I didn't know. You're very. Hey, there you are. Well done. And Tania and Karanga is on the Zoom, and we have apologies from Charles.
But, Liz Munro.
Rick, I spoke to him last night. He's definitely coming. He's running late. He's having a meeting with the chair of the port. So we'll just put apologies for lateness, but he is on duty.
And I'll be from 12 till about 3. I'll be absent, but I'll be returning for a very important part of the late afternoon session.
Thank you, Chair. We'll note that too. We have someone to move the apologies. Uppy, would you do that? Thank you. Second.
Yep.
Will second. All those in favour accept the apologies.
Aye.
Thank you very much. Welcome, Craig.
Thank you. Sorry
Running
for
a little
the
bit late today.
Aye, Air New Zealand, state-owned airline. Things have gone down a
You've
bit,
been
eh?
wheeling dealing around the country. Okay, conflict of interest declarations. Any conflict of interest declarations in regard to this agenda today? There are none. We will.
Mr Chair, it's not a conflict, but I have acted for a number of the entities that are discussed in the Coastal Environment Effectiveness Report, putting that on the table.
I think we should acknowledge that. Thank you very much, Martin. We will
I
acknowledge
can name
that.
them if you want, but
No, just a general that you have acted on those people. Thank you very much. Confirmation of the minutes, 19th of August. Are there any corrections to those minutes? If not, do we have anyone who will move them, please? Peter, Hanny Y, Peter Puckett, will you second that? Thank you very much. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye. Are there any matters rising from those minutes that are not on this agenda that people wish to discuss? That's not an agenda item, but I just want to check. There are none. Good. Right, call for minor items not on the agenda. Anyway, you have one.
The Napier City Council Waterways and Ahuriri Estuary trip.
Thank you. Any other minor items? We just have one. Thank you very much. We'll move to item 6, Mohaka, the first decision and the only decision. Just before we go, Neil, you're such an observant chap. I want you to just watch the screen every periodically and make sure that someone's hand's not up.
Wrong person.
I am going to rely on you, Neil. I have total confidence that you will. And we don't have anyone sitting here, but if I miss anyone, just give me a nudge. But if we can watch the screen. Thank you, Neil. You can put your glasses back on for that.
That makes it worse.
Neil can do a fine job. That might quiet down.
Well, I haven't got eyes in the back of my head.
No.
Mike, can you keep an eye on the
No.
screen there, mate?
Sorry, I missed the follow-ups. I've just been
Yeah,
corrected.
screen's away.
So, the follow-ups from the previous meeting? There was quite a few, I know.
So there's a number, Chair, that need to still come back to the committee and are a work in progress. And we've also got matters being dealt with today.
Get my screen back to where I need to be.
So, several matters to come back, particularly in relation to burning.
Okay, whilst I get my...
It's coming back.
So we just take those as read, Chair.
Well, are there any comments on the follow-ups before we do that? We'll take them as read, but are there any questions on the follow-ups? If If there are none, then can I have a mover to receive the follow-ups? Henny Wine? Martin, will you second that? Thank you very much. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much. So we move to the Mohaka plan change. Now, Terry, is that you?
It's myself and Dale Meredith. So this item was deferred from the RPC meeting on the 19th of August. And essentially what the paper does is outlines a bit of the history with regards to the Mohaka plan change. As you're probably all well aware, this is the third attempt at reviewing the plan in the Mohaka. So the work recommenced probably about a year ago, and Dale is the lead planner on this particular catchment project. So perhaps if I hand over to Dale, you'd like to speak to the paper?
So essentially this paper presents to RPC a pathway forward in terms of the project brief for developing the land and freshwater provisions that give effect to the National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management within the Mohaka catchment. So that includes all of the tributaries of that catchment. The key feature with this work is that we are looking to improve how we work with tangata whenua. So the phrase co-design of the approach has been used. So what we are looking at is a process forward which incorporates strong and effective engagement with tangata whenua right from the beginning, and their involvement in pulling together all of the material that comes forward to the RPC for consideration. And to that effect, we've been working in particular with Ngāti Pahuera, but we have also contacted a number of the other, all of the other iwi authorities and entities that have a critical interest in the Mohaka catchment. So there are some 8 of them. And we are looking at a process which will involve community engagement, both with the tangata whenua and the community before Christmas of this year. Bonnie Hautami from Ngāti Pahuera will be leading the engagement with the various hapu and marae groups, and there's a process underway that she's going to click in with some of their regular meetings to introduce the Mohaka work. And we are also looking at a wider range of initial meetings with the community to talk about the vision that they have for the Mohaka, the sorts of outcomes that they want to see, and then moving into the more pragmatic issues around land and freshwater management and what that might mean within their area of interest. We will then develop a work program and various work streams where we look at those interests, and we'll have people pulled in from tangata whenua as well as stakeholders to progress critical issues. We'll assess some different options and bring those back to the community and tangata whenua before landing on what we think is the preferred option. And the preferred option we will develop further and pull together the implementation or action plan that goes with that, which will pick up all of the things that aren't rules. And that will also include any additional resourcing requirements to address particular problems, and that will then push through into the, for Council's commitment, the annual plan and long-term plan processes. So essentially it is looking to work with tangata whenua and with our communities in a staged process to come up with a plan change proposal. Ultimately, given the Kotahi discussion, it looks like the actual notification of that means that it will slip in as a chapter within the wider review of the Regional Resource Management Plan. But that is something that you'll be talking about later this morning. So essentially we're looking for endorsement to start on this process of engagement with the community, being aware that we need to continually keep our eyes and ears open for how we can better work with our tangata whenua people.
Thank you very much. Right, questions? Martin, and then you join Nala.
Morena, thank you, Dale, for that. I just wanted to get some clarification around the definition of co-design from some of the hui that have been held. That's about the project team in terms of how they have established their protocols in terms of reference around co-design of the concept of engaging right through the process. I think so, the recommendations that you've put up, there were some things that had question mark over around the project brief, for instance, as to whether that was agreed and signed off as a co-design partnership thing or not. From what I've been made aware of is that the project brief was not agreed by the other partner in terms of in the co-design concept stage of things. So that for us is a bit of a concern that if it's about co-design, then partners have to agree on what papers come up to RPC. That's my first comment and question about do you have a protocol or terms of reference with the project brief team or the project team about how your co-design will work? That's the first question. The second one was around your recommendation in, I think it's 2.4, about establishing a Mohaka steering group. We believe that there's no need to do that on the understanding that you have access to the RPC TWR to come and consult with, and elected councillors that have a brief over that particular catchment at the same time. So I believe you've got already the opportunity to engage at that level with the people rather than going to set up another group, but just utilise what's already here. The other one was, I think it was just around that and the support of the co-design process about how that might look and whether you've got to that stage or not. So, yeah, so those are my questions anyway. And if we can look at later on, when it comes to the recommendations, I'd like to add some amendments to two of those, or three of the recommendations. Thank you.
Sure. Do you want to answer those questions?
Jump away first, will you? About co-design.
So, I've got three questions here. The first one was around terms of reference and the protocol for co-design and how we initiated that. So, probably around 18 months ago, we held our first recommencement hui with iwi, with interest in the Mohaka catchment. And essentially, the conclusion of that was that mandate was given to Bonnie Hatami to act on their behalf in engaging with us around an MOU. So we landed the MOU probably, when did we, only a few months ago, because of COVID. There was a bit of a delay in that MOU development. So that essentially sets out the protocols for the co-design and the work that we do with tangata whenua within the Mohaka catchment. So as I said, Bonnie Hatami has essentially been given that mandate. And yes, we do apologise. We acknowledge that the project brief, which is appended to the paper, is only in draft and hasn't gone through a co-design development process. This is just the first iteration, which just indicates where we think the project brief could land. So we will be taking that back to Bonnie and working on that further. So this is just an initial indication of what a project brief would look like for the project. With regards to the steering group, actually fully acknowledge that that's a much more appropriate way of setting up the project team. We would very much like for those elected members and the tangata whenua representatives within the Mohaka catchment to be our sounding board, if you like, because that's essentially what the steering group is. So we absolutely welcome that approach. And I think we've had pre-discussions with Bonnie around that, and that is, within the scope of the project, the MOU. So that sits well with Bonnie. So yeah, we would accept that as a suggestion and take that on board. And the third question was, what stage are we at? Very much at the infancy of this project. As I said, the MOU took quite some time to deliver. There was a lot of hard work into that to make sure that we had a good relationship. We've been working really hard on relationship, not just with Pahuira, but with the other tangata whenua within the Mohaka catchment. To date, we've only had 2 meetings, the initial one 18 months ago and then another back in August. Mike was in attendance at that meeting. So we're very much at the beginning of the process, of the journey.
Lovely, thank you.
If I could add to that, Chair, if that's possible.
Yeah, sure.
So if I was to summarise that in terms of the question, and that is about co-design, whilst we've gone through the MOU in relation to all the participating PSGs, co-design is the next step. And I guess what's sought here in terms of pre-notification is to go into that next discussion, which is to nail down what co-design looks like equitably across all of those. I guess the hanging question and amongst that is, so who are the co-design partners that are mentioned in here? And from our perspective at least, and this is something that the project team will need to defend all the way through this process, is that from our perspective, the co-design partners are tangata whenua in terms of PSGEs and HBRC. And the supporting part, as you've mentioned, as a virtual steering group, are the elected representatives, the PSGs, HBRC.
Kia ora.
Tania, do you have any questions? Because this is definitely your Ruhi. Tania's got one. He's got a hand up. Well done, Api.
Chairman,
Now, Martin, I missed you. I would never miss you on purpose, Martin.
it's all right.
You're on, Martin.
Thank you. Hey, well, that's good. Thank you. Those questions from that pretty much covered a number of the thoughts going through my mind. I was just wanting to better shape, fully support the kaupapa of co-design. I just wanted to understand a little bit more about that. So thank you. That's been helpful. First question though, so the steering group, do I get this right? The steering group would be elected representatives and RPC representatives for that rohi. Is that that's the idea?
Within that catchment.
Who would be, there's 2 other terms used in the draft brief that we've been asked to adopt. Project brief is there's a core team and a project policy team. Who are they?
So the core team is a key staff within council and also Bonnie from Ngāti Pahuera. So the core team is myself, Brendan Powell, who is manager of catchment implementation, Dr. Gary Rushworth, who is coordinating science inputs on the project, Melanie Tarawa in terms of the Māori Partnerships group, and Rebecca Ashcroft Cullen in terms of the communications team. Nathan Heath, who is with Māori Partnerships up in the Northern Catchments area.
Okay, thank you, that's helpful. So, and then the other, 2 more questions ago. The second question, is co-design the same as dual pathway? There's a reference to dual pathway in there. Is that the same thing?
A dual pathway, I think, is an opportunity within the concept of co-design for tangata whenua and other stakeholders to look in their own way at the resource management issues that have been faced. The intention is to come together at those key points of what's the overall vision, of the options that are available, what are the things that we think would be preferred, and then of the preferred option, how are we then going to actually make it work properly. So it's basically parallel paths but intersecting at key points.
Okay. And my final question is the relationship between this and Kotahi. So this could be a model for a kind of a ground-up catchment solution that rises to the fore and then gets integrated with other ground-up catchment solutions into the Kotahi plan. Is that the idea, or is this going to get taken over by the Kotahi plan or subsumed? I mean, what's the...
No, it won't be taken over. So the work that we're doing within Mohaka is actually the work that we would like to replicate within the other catchments.
So this
as
will
we
be
get
like
to them.
an exemplar or a model.
Exactly.
Pilot. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Now, Tania Hopman, you've got a question?
Atamaria, everyone. It's a question relating to page 19, and there's a map on there, and I may have missed this somewhere, but I can't quite clearly see it. I thought it was my eyes, but I rechecked online. There seems to be, this is a map of the Mohaka catchment, but there's some dotted lines, and if I'm right in understanding, one of the dotted lines relates to an area south of the Waikato River. So as Maunga Hararu Tangitu Trust, we didn't think we needed to be involved in the Mohaka plan change. But I'm seeing some dotted lines that come south of the Waikato. So is that intended to be included here? Because I wasn't aware of that prior. The Waikato to me is not part of the Mohaka catchment.
So Tanya, my understanding is that that's just showing the adjacent catchments, one of which is the Waikari, as you say, and that the plan is not intended to include those. It is solely the Mohaka catchment.
Okay, cool, thank you.
A similar line to the north too.
Now, do you have a question, Tony?
I was going to say, being the new kid on the block, Janella addressed the red flags with in regard to Ngāti Pāho where it's concerned, so I'm happy. We just wait for the recommendations that I would support.
Now, Craig was first, then you, Henry White.
Thanks. Just regarding point 3.1, the success measures, the final one, number 5, talks about non-statutorily prescribed actions achieving good environmental, farming, iwi and community outcomes. Can you describe or expand a wee bit on what are some successful farming, iwi, if you like, but particularly community outcomes? Sometimes these things have a tendency to go a bit wider than what the original intent was. And so what those success factors are and who decides what a good farming outcome is, for example.
A good farming outcome is going to be, that's part of what this initial round of engagement will be doing, is identifying what the vision and what the outcomes are and what people across the community in its widest sense would consider to be a successful outcome for that catchment.
So what's an example?
An example might be, I don't know, something like some of the hotspot works that we're doing, or riparian planting, where the rules in the plan might prescribe some minimum requirements, but because the community wants to do something more ambitious than that, it enables that to be recognised within the body of work, which is generally contributing to improving, good land and water outcomes.
So the core tension can there be delivering what's required from government under the which one is it? NES.
Yeah.
But the tension there is potentially going above and beyond that.
Yes.
So that's a cost that may be recommended, and a cost that someone somehow will pay to go beyond what the government, assuming the community is supportive of that. And obviously all communities are diverse. It's great that you said the wider community, because there's many stakeholders under each of your subheadings there: environmental, farming, iwi, and community. And so very interested, as you go through, or you start to, what are you actually looking for there? Someone may decide they've got no interest in going further, doing further planting or fencing. We might like them to, but actually it's quite a call to go above and beyond.
Councillor, I could give you a very specific example, would be that Section 360 regulations that have been promulgated around stock exclusion require stock to be excluded, and the minimum requirement therefore is a single wire, so it could be a hot wire fence, for example, and so that would be the regulatory requirement, but we might come alongside that and say that we're prepared as a council to support more extensive fencing and planting of the waterway, which wouldn't be required by law, it would be voluntary for the landowner, but we might wish to support that as a council as a non-regulatory intervention alongside it to achieve the outcomes. And that would be something that the rate-paying community would have to decide, that to get the outcomes it wants, it's prepared to go over and above the regulation to assist landowners in doing more, or the landowners would just do that voluntarily.
So if we go down that route, which is great, but can we also look to work with some of the advocacy agencies there, your Fed Farmers or your Fonterras, who actually have the strongest leverage in encouraging people, farmers, to do the right thing? And many of them are supposed to be doing this anyway under their procurement policies, Silver Ferns, for example, to explore that angle, which is good for everybody, and particularly ratepayers somewhere else who's not necessarily subsidising fencing off a stream, which we all think the person should do anyway.
So that look. So Councillor, on page 26 of your papers, noted there is the importance of the primary sector supporting services group, and it's not only in terms of assessing the environmental impacts, as it says there, best practices and education programs, and then a list of entities there. So very much in the design of the plan, and particularly the implementation plan, we would expect their full involvement in what they can provide and offer to achieve the outcomes alongside us. And it may well be, like you say, that they have areas of comparative advantage where they can deliver in ways that council or others cannot.
Absolutely. And you've got Osprey listed there. So, for example, I imagine they need to earn their stripes, re-earn their stripes, particularly in that larger area. And I'd drag them kicking and screaming to up their game.
Thank you, Craig. Henny White?
Kia ora, Kerry, Dale, Pere. I just want to acknowledge the team for coming forward and bringing a different design plan change compared to Tank, which took a bit longer than we expected. But in terms of this dual pathway, and you're talking about intersecting points, what role do you see the RPC playing at what regularity within those intersecting points? Do you see us take a role? Will you be coming back every RPC with decision items around those intersecting points, or what may that look like?
It'd be good if we sort of just reserved on that one there, because the project brief itself, within which that process is set out, hasn't yet been discussed in terms of a co-design approach. So that still needs to happen. And this also picks up in response to your question, Councillor Foss, and also the response from here. Again, there are other aspects that need to be added in there from NPSFM, like mahinga kai, like endangered species, like mātauranga Māori. So all of that needs to be fed in as part of this process within the brief and discussed. So if we were to hold on that, at some point, subject to the co-design and the brief, we would come back, because we'd be leaning on both the elected representatives and the PSGs who are at this table to be progressively updated. That ultimately leads to your confidence about notification at some point in the future.
Think anyway, Sheriff?
Yeah, just a quick question. In your target audience, you mentioned a whole lot of groupings. In the tank process, we had one catchment group, and that catchment group took quite an active role in actually giving advice, not giving advice, but as an example of actually what can be done, and there's good communication with that particular group. I don't see actually any mention in here about catchment groups. Is that not part of the thinking, that we maybe at the same time we actually try to encourage catchment groups to be developed, so we actually have got groups that we actually can work with?
I think catchment groups are an integral part of progressing this work forwards. Without catchment groups, we completely lose the power of the collective and the people who are living locally and actually doing good stuff. So, for example, the Tahurua catchment group is reformed itself about a year ago and is quietly working away, rebuilding relationships with the new landowners and so forth, and familiarising themselves with some of the wider issues that they're going to have to land. I would also, and again this is part of this whole co-design thing in terms of how we progress it, I would also envisage we would have some working groups on some particular topics, which might be nitrogen management or sediment management or something like that, and that would pull together stakeholder interests to work up what the proposed solutions can be.
Thank you. Are there any other questions before I go to Jonella's amendments?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
You have a question, Rapi?
Yeah, I do. I've got a couple, and they're actually more around clarity than they are questions. So, first of all, thank you very much for the first question from the co-chair around defining co-design. As with the feedback we received from the mana whenua at the meeting last week amongst our collective tangata whenua reps, there was some confusion and some concern around how this was worded. And so really, really encouraging to hear that this is actually just the starting pistol to engage and that, excuse me, and that verbally we've received assurances that there is nothing set in concrete, only the desire to communicate. So those are absolutely fantastic indicators. My concern is that as I read the paper, I'm not getting exactly the same interpretation from the paper, and I'm worried that as we continue to progress the paper in its current form, we may be committing not only this team, but also iwi to a schedule that they haven't been really deeply involved in building. So as this item continues to progress forward, particularly recommendation 2.3 for me, I would love to see the terminology and how the intent of this paper is expressed to be tidied up, because at the moment it implies that the team have built a plan and everyone's just going to jump on the waka. So I'm worried about that implication, and I don't want to set anyone up for an uncomfortable interaction with iwi because we're well experienced at going to war. So really would look forward to the next revision of this, and I'll wait for conversations at this table to progress as to how we deal with 2.3.
Jonelle, are your amendments dealing with...
Yep, I think they do. Yep.
Okay, could we have your
Okay.
amendments to the recommendation? I have seen them, but I'd like to see them up on the...
Yep. Okay, for 2.1, don't have a problem with 2.1.
Okay.
2.2, rather than have that agrees to support a co-design process between HBRC and Tangata Whenua for development of the proposed Mohaka catchment plan change.
Okay, that's excellent.
Rather than
Yeah.
co-design.
Yep.
And then in 2.3, we received the draft project brief as a guide development, subject to the endorsement of all co-design partners for the proposed Mohaka catchment plan change and draft implementation plan. And I think that would cover your thing about being committed to this plan if it's agreed to. We receive it, and then it allows them to go on and develop the plan further.
Can we get those changes on the...
And just to add to that, Chair, I think the other amendment sought was to strike out the existing 2.4.
Yeah.
I'll strike it out. Okay. Okay.
We don't need another group.
Oh, okay, well, that wasn't the question.
We don't have a steering group. Okay.
So, yeah, how do people be that no steering group? That was Jonelle, but actually, you guys want the steering group, don't you?
Yep.
No, it was a suggestion,
to be
and I
fair,
think this is a far more elegant solution to that.
Are you happy with that?
The steering group was first call envisaged as exactly what you've described in terms of
Okay, strike it out then.
yeah.
Let's strike it out.
Yep.
What was the other change?
2.3, you had another change.
2.3 was receives the project brief as a guide development of the proposed Mohuka catchment plan change and draft implementation plan.
You said
Subject to, I think it was subject to
Yeah.
the endorsement,
Much better.
guide development, and then subject to the endorsement of all co-design partners for the proposed Mohuka catchment plan change.
But if taken literally, that means that until you get all co-design partners on board, they have a veto over the first part.
Yep.
Are we comfortable with that? Because nothing can be received until such time as all co-design partners have endorsed it. Is that what we really want?
So, Chair, I would note that this committee effectively, and this is obviously part of the history and the kaupapa of this committee, is that it is a consensus-based committee, which is why we have our 80% voting rule. And so effectively this committee has a veto. And so what we're really saying is that this committee needs to be satisfied, that the co-design partners are satisfied, and from a staff point of view, we would recommend that the co-design partners would be the PSGs, PSG-based. We recognise that tangata whenua have a range of interests in the catchment, ranging from very commercial ones. There are a lot of entities, obviously, which is noted in the project brief by way of land trusts, etc. And I guess what we wouldn't, to really answer your question, Councillor, what we wouldn't want to do is not get started until everybody in the catchment is happy about where we're going, because that's impractical. What we recognise is that there is an established mandating mechanism by way of the post-settlement treaty entities, and that is reflected in the composition of this committee. So we would want to mirror that composition with the definition of the co-design partners.
But that recommendation says all, subject to all, that's what I mean.
It does, so it goes to who are the co-design partners, and I guess what we are saying is that the co-design partners are the PSGs with an interest in the catchment.
Api, do you have a comment on those amendments?
Yeah, just with regards to what I believe the risks are that Councillor Foss is highlighting, and that it is, as James indicated, incredibly difficult to get 100% of people to agree on the colour you're going to paint the kitchen. So in this instance, however, I'd like to provide some confidence to this council in that for iwi, a part of progressing our aspirations and our values sometimes requires us to lock ourselves within the whare until we achieve consent and we agree on a purpose and we move collectively. That's never easy, often contentious, and many tears and laughter are shared. However, there is a cultural layer of obligation that sits in the background of how we'll be interacting, and that cultural expectancy remains today, as it did hundreds of years ago. And so I have some confidence that while it might not necessarily be as quick as we would all like, that there is a layer of expectation amongst our iwi partners and our stakeholders that they will sit at the table until they get the job done. That's how we've operated in the past, and I'm assuming we'll be consistent with that going forward.
Thank you, Api. Actually, I 100% agree. I think it'd be quicker this way. This is a much better process.
But, okay, well, I mean, I accept that's fine, but to the CEO's point there then, do we, you said who you expect the co-design partners to be, so perhaps that should be just, can that be defined as you described it a bit better?
So I think we could come back with back to the committee with that as the project brief is finalised in partnership. We do that in parallel. But our starting position is that the mandated PSGs with mana in the catchment, the appropriate code. I mean, they are the.
Oh no, I don't argue that at all. I'm just, why don't you just say that then?
Yep.
As opposed to co-design partners.
Does anyone disagree with that?
Mr. Chair, I could have the floor. I'm picking up from what James was just talking about, because in the when we had our last meeting, that is where I was really coming from. In the documents, we've got a map. I think it's on page 19. It's too small. It shows nothing, absolutely nothing. So the co-designs come through, which are the other PSGs. We got to sit in at the end and make a judgment but I can't make a judgment on any of this. That plan needs changing. We need to see where the other iwis fit in. We need to see where the other little sub-catchments are. We need to see rivers, streams, where the trusts are, where the maraes are. All of these things we talk about need to be on a major plan so that I can get the plan, tick it off, and know that every piece of the work has been done to clear me, to clear Heretaunga, not for the committee. But we are part of that
Rick,
committee.
I think, you can be the last speaker, I think we need to move along. I mean,
No,
hopefully that's what they're going to do,
We
Peter.
can't move along at all, Mr Chairman.
Well,
if
we
I
can
get
on these
a-
amendments, Peter, to be fair.
Sorry, I
We
missed
can accept these amendments.
Chair, I'm just saying, look, we've had an explanation who partners are. I don't need it written out there. We know what we mean.
Yeah.
Look, I'm just, if we have to go down and right to the finest detail, then we'll need to know exactly what the corporate is, who the trustees are, etc. We don't need that level of detail. We know exactly who we're talking about. Let's get on with it.
I never asked for that.
No, I'm not talking.
Yeah.
Do you want to move the
Chair,
amendments?
I'm happy
Fine,
to
we
move
have
the
all.
amendments as they are.
And I'm happy to
Don't wanna
second
be
them,
voting.
actually.
Yeah.
Second.
Excuse me. Hi, can we see them on the screen?
I need to.
I agree with the amendments, I just wanted to be able to see them.
Cool.
They're on our screen, sorry, Tony.
Can we use the Darth Vader in the middle of the room and
Yeah, I
focus
call
on
him
the screen?
It is Darth Vader.
Just through the chair, 2.3, we need to replace the with a.
Receives, yeah.
Oh,
No,
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 it's
it's
done
up
on
the top.
2.2.
Yeah, it is
Two
done,
point two, agrees to support A co-design.
Tanya, is
Would
that
you be happy
readable?
if someone read it out to you, Tanya?
Slowly.
Doesn't seem to be.
That would put the text on the Facebook stream. I don't know if it would put it on the Zoom. Is that right?
Only can share
Can't
it.
get that on Zoom.
She can share it.
Can you see it now?
It's not up there yet, but it will be in a moment.
Yeah, it's Facebook.
Oh, yeah. She needs to share a desktop for the Zoom.
I suggest we've got a technical problem. Let's just
There you
proceed
go.
with the vote.
Yeah, well,
She's
I'll
got
give
it
her
now.
2 minutes. She's got it now.
Thumbs up. She'll take 1 cup of coffee with 3 sugars.
Tanya, you happy with that?
Can she see it?
You're on mute. Okay.
Just reading the text now.
Oh, it's not hard to read, is it?
Not
Another.
hard to read it.
Should have got it off now.
We have a mover and a seconder. John Allen, do you wish to speak?
I just want to say that this process is not going to in any way impede the progress of the plan. But yeah, no, totally support the co-design in terms of what they're.
Thank you. And, I'd wish to speak as well. I'm really pleased that this is a really excellent process that we're going through. We absolutely need to have co-design in all our catchments, and especially this one, where the treaty groups and Tāna Whenua are huge property owners, been there for many years, have huge interest in the Mohaka River, which is one of our greatest rivers, if not our greatest. And we do and want to have a process which involves everybody and a true partnership process. And I think that we're getting close to getting it. So I'm really pleased with this result. Any other speakers? Yes, Martin?
Yes, Chairman, I just, look, everything you just said, my caution is that I'm not quite clear on why we've deleted the steering group as something that wouldn't have usefully facilitated the process, so perhaps someone could explain that to me. And I just note that, this has got a lot of good faith and goodwill behind 2.3, and this committee, I imagine if we get to the point where it hasn't worked and there hasn't been an agreed project brief, we can revisit that as a committee. What we can't have is this sort of stall or get stuck. We have to move forward. So with that thought in mind, could someone just clarify why we're deleting the steering group? In other words, a more confined huddle of people who could advise this broader committee when we meet less frequently than perhaps it will.
Thank you, Martin. Jonella did actually explain that. Would you like to just...
Well, I missed it. I didn't.
Could
I
you...
stick with it?
I
1
think
minute.
Yeah. How we saw it was that the project team have access to the RPC TWR members around the table that are directly involved with that catchment. And I think if I can put a thing that there are only 2 PSGs that don't have a direct involvement or an interest in the Mohaka.
Oh, I see.
So on that basis, we're saying to the project team they have that valuable team of TWR people to come and talk with and consult with, which we have invited the team along to our TWR meetings to discuss things, and also that they have access to the elected councillors that are directly involved with that catchment to soundboard off. So yeah, so we don't think it's trying to put another group between everything else. We just think that it just gets too top heavy with a
right.
group in between a group.
That's clearer. Thank
Yeah.
you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
Any other speakers?
More around, so speaking in favour of the recommendations that sit before us currently, but I would like to send a signal around some follow-ups, if I can please, Mr. Chair. So there are a number of commitments indicated in the paper, so I'd love to see where those will be reflected in LTP planning as we start to approach that space, so that we've got the confidence that we've got the necessary resources to do that. It's just not immediately apparent. Sorry, there were quite a large list of things, but thankfully the conversation has evolved in a completely different space. And the last one was around resourcing with in-house and how the policy and planning team will be supported in the Mohaka catchment, particularly with regards to Peter's comments around having access to good GIS data and the layers. So if there's an aspect where those parties to whom we've already mentioned have the ability to build a dynamic interface around populating information once on a good system that enables us to be able to visit the work progressively with good detail, that would be a most welcome addition in the ongoing plan. And I believe that was one of the primary requests of Committee Member Paku around something more user-friendly and more adaptable than what's currently in this report would be a welcome addition. Outside of that, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, in support of the
Any other
recommendations.
speakers? Rick?
Just briefly to say, Chair, I'm always hardwired as an optimist. I see the people who are optimistic this is going to be a better process than we've had before. I do recall that Tank started out with a huge amount of enthusiasm and optimism, what a wonderful process it was going to be, and it ran into some serious headwinds. I think the proof of the pudding will be in the eating. It's going to be at the end, did this actually work better? And therefore the challenge is to the participants in this, if this doesn't work any better than the plans we've had before, because we argue over process and who did what and so on, then it'll be discredited. So the challenge is on the people to make this work and work efficiently, so it encourages us to go and do this again in other rivers. The rivers are in trouble. We need to get on and change the plans and improve them. So that's the other big challenge, is that as long as we muck around with plans and processes and think tanks and groups and so on, the problem continues. We need to get action.
Thank you, Rick. And do you want to wind up, Jonella, or are you happy
No,
to?
I'm quite happy. Yep.
Okay, all those in favour?
Aye.
Against?
Mr. Chairman.
Against. Do you wish your vote recorded to be against?
Recorded.
All those in favour, raise their hand.
On the
All those against? There he is. Okay.
Corona.
Oh, Corona?
He's-
They will
he's-
vote.
I wasn't sure whether he was a hand up or not.
Honey, were you a hand up in support?
Tanya and Nikki were, but Corona's
Corona's
video's not on.
Okay, we have moved forward on that. Okay.
Can we just record Corona's vote? Can we ask Corona how he voted?
Corona, how did you vote, mate?
Got your camera off and your mute on.
If you haven't got an answer, it has to be an abstention.
Yeah.
Just go back there, so somebody must go.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, yes, yeah.
Yep, we can hear you now.
Yeah,
Did you vote? Did you vote yes for
I'm
that?
for that. Yep,
Corona?
I'm for that.
Okay, four. Okay, good. Rightio.
Right, thank you.
It's overwhelming support for it. Thank you very much. So we'll go to information and performance monitoring, regional coastal environment. Elaine, are you going to do this? Who's doing this?
Alan?
Ellen, sorry.
Call in and saying this would be a better approach. Thanks for the optimism.
No, we're all good. This is Thank you,
Kato?
Ellen. Right, the floor is yours.
Seat was a bit further down than I thought.
And we have allotted 20 minutes for this, so hopefully.
Are we on schedule?
We're dead on schedule, man. To
Give
the
that
minute.
message.
To the minute.
Keep that steady hand on the tiller.
Oh, if I can control it.
Well, no loss of focus here, Chair.
Yes, the floor is yours.
Okay, brilliant. So this coastal environment plan review was undertaken by a previous staff member, Erin O'Callaghan, and then she completed it after she had left this employment, and then I was the one to peer review it. So the Regional Coastal Environment Plan, although it was made operative in 2012, it was subject to a very prolonged Environment Court and procedure, so it was notified in 2006. So that means a lot of the provisions are much older than they appear. So I guess the summary of the report is noted. The efficiency was unable to be reviewed due to insufficient information. At the time that the plan was written, the requirements of Section 32 were vastly different to what they are now. The summary of Section 32 report is only 30-odd pages long, and so it really doesn't include the detail required to do a proper analysis of efficiency. However, we were able to, or Erin was able to undertake a review of effectiveness, and those results are very broadly summarised in the paper. So it found that the methods, non-regulatory methods in general, were being implemented really well, and there was mixed results of the anticipated environmental results due to changes in data collection and monitoring, and so some of those were inconclusive. But some general trends were that estuaries continue declining. However, the quality of swimming sites has been high and generally remains that way.
Thank you, Alan. Any questions?
Yeah, that's several, Mr. Chair.
Neil?
Before I go into some detail, I just wondered if we could go to page 16 of the report. There's page 16. Oh, it's got 11 and 16, one of the two. I just want to know why the compliance team didn't respond to various requests for information. What happened there?
I don't know the detail of that particular case, I'm sorry. I think it probably was a matter of resourcing at that time, and I know, for instance, with the state of environment reporting, there had been delays around that as well. So I think the task in itself was reasonably difficult because of the lack of information, changing in systems as well. We went from DAISY to IRIS within the consents team. So there were a number of complexities which sat behind the review.
I hear that, but let's go to the words used in the report. And you'll see there about a third of the way down, the compliance team did not respond when asked to provide feedback on information about coastal incidents that were reported in annual reports. And then if we go to page 17 or 22, multiple emails were sent to the council compliance team to obtain feedback on compliance monitoring observations. No response was received from the team. So my first inquiry is what happened with the compliance team, and why were they not responding to clear requests for information?
So I don't think anyone on this side can answer that question.
Okay, that's
Liz
fine.
may be able to answer.
Yeah, so look, I can't really, I don't know the specific answer to that question, but because I don't know what questions were
last of the compliance team.
Sure, okay, that's fine.
You know, I'm just reminding you that we do report through an annual compliance report.
Sure.
So any issues around
Yeah.
coastal
I-
activities that may crop up will be.
Well, that was another line of questioning where the report is saying we didn't report. So,
Look, an internal request from one team to another not being responded to, in my view, is not acceptable. So I'm happy to look into
yeah, just
what's
if
happening.
we can just follow through on that, because
it's disappointing.
It is disappointing, and I just possibly the best place for me to start, Mr. Chair, is on the conclusions, and I'm taking everyone to page 115 at the very bottom of the report, or 1110. Take your choice, and this summarised the entire review to me. Outcome 8.2 outcomes. Have we achieved what we'd said we'd achieve? Approximately 46 anticipated environmental results were achieved. 19 were not achieved. 38 outcomes were unknown. So that tells me there was a heck of a lot of stuff either not happening or not reported, and it's backed up by a number of comments in the report, which just says so much stuff was unknown and happening, and I'm really I'm concerned that the executive summary doesn't actually reflect my concern when I read the report in its entirety. It doesn't say, look, this is clearly an inadequate plan in many respects, and I'm not seeing that similar alarm coming through in the executive summary. I don't know if it's just me responding to this, or is that a fair commentary on an inadequate plan?
I think part of it is the context in which this was produced. So, you know, we're going back 14 years ago that it was drafted, and then obviously took 12 years subsequently, 12, 14, 6, no,
Sure.
8 years to become operative.
Yeah.
And during that time, this council went from, you know, a sort of a planning team of 2 people to building significant capability and also having some marine science capability. But in terms of our understanding of outcomes in the marine space, I would say we're still very light as an organisation. I think, Councillor, you're acutely aware of that. It's one of the things I often contemplate is the fact that, you know, 1/3 of the entire surface area of the planet that this council is responsible for is in the coastal marine area, and yet probably it, you know, gets about 2% of the organisation's overall resourcing. So we have a very heavy focus on what happens on land, notwithstanding that an awful lot of what happens on land does end up in the coastal marine area, and sediment's a good example. But, you know, obviously the marine space is one that local government across New Zealand is relatively passive in terms of managing, in terms of those broad set of outcomes. So we focus on the most acute areas, which are direct discharges, the erection of structures and what have you in the coastal environment, which are those very immediate and tangible things that can have the greatest impact that need to be managed. But then when we go and write a plan, we talk about a whole set of broad outcomes that we're trying to achieve in that marine environment without necessarily having the full suite of interventions to achieve all those outcomes, and certainly not the institutional capability to monitor those over time. So I think all of these issues are going to come back on the table as part of the refresh of the RCEP through Kotahi, assuming that this committee endorses the Kotahi approach. And we're going to have to think quite deeply, I think, as an organisation about what it is that we are trying to achieve, and whether we're going to put resources alongside that to truly understand the efficacy of our interventions.
Yes, okay. Well, Mr. Chair, thanks for that, James. It's a good summation of the history of this plan, and it would probably useful to go to page 25 or 20 in the commentary from iwi at the time. The research highlights that iwi of Hawke's Bay are deeply concerned over the present-day state of the coastal environment, lack of basic information about the location, condition, important subtitle zone, etc. There's a strong commentary, and clearly the people intimately connected and affected were much more ahead of the game than the council in that regard, in terms of reflecting, alarming, and bringing to attention that we have this major deficit in our coastal marine environment. So I don't want to go into speech making, Mr. Chair, but what I'm suggesting is, and the Kotahi opportunity is there, is that we really do need to focus and get iwi, this committee in particular, to really drive this next round of engagement. It's just, we have failed. I'm embarrassed myself being a party to that plan in its infancy, and to come to this point with, in my view, complete failure, or not complete failure, then we've got to do better. We've got to do much better.
I think in terms of the most, again, the most acute impacts that are point source, we are regulating those sufficiently. We recognise there are diffuse impacts by way of nutrient contaminants and sediment, which are huge drivers of poor marine ecosystem health that we're getting on top of progressively in the terrestrial environment. And I guess the cold comfort is that every regional council in New Zealand's in exactly the same position, and New Zealand has a systemic set of problems around its institutional arrangements for marine management generally, which successive governments have failed to grip up since the previous attempts to develop an ocean strategy. And as I understand it, there is briefing to the incoming government being prepared that is asking once again whether government is up for looking at more fundamental reform here. And one of those big questions is funding and resourcing, because of course there's no ratepayer base in the marine environment, which is part of the reason that it doesn't get the resourcing from local government that it does from central government. And then we've got a diffusion of institutions, whether it be fisheries or the Department of Conservation or ourselves, involved in the management, and a coordination failure of all of that. So look at, I'll say, actually, as somebody who was responsible for this at the national level several years ago, New Zealand continues to lag best practice internationally in terms of the management of its marine environment, and we've got suboptimal outcomes as a consequence.
Anyway.
Yeah, kia ora. What concerns me the most is point 12.2 on page 32. And it's our estuaries continue to be under significant stress due to land uses in our catchment. However, environmental hotspots funding is enabling restoration of certain areas such as the Ahuriri estuary. Now, the first half is what concerns me. The second half of that is I'd like to know a bit more around how much we actually invest to help solve the problem. Based on what James is saying, it's a collective problem, and we can ask central government for more, but I think we need to take a bit of ownership around what we can do. And an efficiency report is only as good as what we can pull out of it and use within other teams to change the status quo. So maybe for James, what do we invest in our hotspots program, specifically for Ahuriri and for other estuarine areas? And what restoration projects are we involved in from those hotspot programs?
Can I suggest, Chair, that we take this as a follow-up and we provide you with that detail definitively, rather than me guessing a little bit off the top of my head, and paint that picture. And I guess in doing so, I'd perhaps put the caveat that where we draw the line about where our interventions start and stop is an interesting question. So, for example, we have relatively high levels of nitrogen in our coastal environment measured at Awatoto, and my understanding is the largest proportion of that comes from the Tukituki River, and that goes right up to our nitrogen management challenges we have in the Tukituki, which takes us to the Plan Change 6 and everything that we're trying to do up there. And so you can draw lines between the big issues in the coast to quite a lot of what we're doing, including things like right tree, right place and erosion control scheme. So the answer might be, much of or most of what the council is doing in the environmental management space is contributing to better managing outcomes in the marine environment, but we obviously have some very specific things in those estuarine environments that we're working on as well. So we'll try and paint a bit of a picture for you on that.
Yeah, I think that'd be good.
But one more thing though, can you just clarify the hotspots funding is for monitoring and restoration, or just restoration?
Just restoration. So our monitoring program is separate to that, and we obviously do have a coastal marine science program as
So
well.
if you could get back to us at some stage around the hotspot funding, thanks.
Are there any more questions? Otherwise, I'd like someone to move.
I'll move it.
Sorry? You'll move?
Second.
And you'll second, Neil, did you say? Thank you. wish to speak, Martin?
Just very briefly, to pick up on what James has said, I think 1/3 of the region might be the marine environment, but it's quite clear that what we do on the other 2/3 is the driver here. You can have all the point source and structure regulations you like, but it's a bit like sweeping the floor, leaving the window open and your neighbour's biffing dirt through the window every 5 minutes if you don't sort out what's happening on the other 2/3. So that's just the one point, and I hope that this committee and this council stands behind things like right tree, right place, and that we get tank in terms of the other contaminants and stormwater management really into gear as fast as we can, because that's going to be the biggest outcome, positive for the coastal environment to me, than just regulating the marine area. The second thing is that just don't be embarrassed, Councillor Curtin. There's been a paradigm shift under the RMA. The New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement is a very different instrument now as a result of King Salmon than when all of those appeals over those 6 years, people grinding down the policy so that they basically say nothing. They say blah, blah, blah should be avoided, remedied or mitigated. And it's just empty policies. You're going to have, under the Kotahi Plan, a need for sharper edged policies that actually have teeth and mean what they say and say what they mean. And the third thing I think the lesson is here is to make sure that if we're going to have environmental performance indicators or measures and outcomes, that you can monitor them. So I think there is a future here if we invest in what we do on land. We have policy that actually bites and says what it means, and measurable performance outcomes.
Thank you, Martin. Very well said. Neil.
Yeah, well, just following on from that, and that performance monitoring clearly highlights some serious deficiencies in the plan itself, and the commentary is coming through there. I'm also much interested, or very much interested and concerned about the lack of basic information that we've got about the coastal environment. And what I'm concerned about is we're in the long-term plan process, so we're setting the agenda for the next 10 years. Are we going to wait another 10 years before we actually do anything and understand what we're dealing with? And that's what I think, and I think it's a plea to this committee that, and particularly given that the tangata whenua are at the front end of monitoring and appreciating this environment, we clearly have not done well. We need your guidance and motivation to push hard on this particular issue, and it's really the focus needs to come on. If you're not seeing the investment and focus in this area in the long-term plan, then all of us have not done our job. So I'm really looking forward to that discussion as we go forward over the next few months to make sure we get this right this time.
Thank you. Any other speakers? You've been really great. You have 1 minute to go. So,
Chair, just before you put it, can I just make the observation that you will have a good opportunity this afternoon to engage in the workshop with the Coastal Science team around our current science program and the gaps, and they certainly would welcome increased focus and investment. So that'll be a good opportunity to drill into it.
All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Okay. Item 8, Kotahi. And we're dead on time, team. You're doing extremely well. Alan, are you leaving? You're on.
Eleanor's? Yep.
Yeah, I'll take this one.
You will? Okay.
Right, sorry, bear with. I just need to get my presentation. Morena koutou. I've prepared a presentation here. Actually, my team have. Thank you, Alan. Just around the paper. So we have two options. Either I can talk directly to the paper or we can run through the presentation.
Run through the presentation.
Okay.
Excuse me, are you able to share the presentation or email the presentation?
Yeah. Yes, well, Annalise just going to sort that for you, Tanya. Just one moment.
Waitangi's coming along, Chair.
Yeah, I know. Looking great. It's a newish boat. I went there yesterday. It's a nice place to go and think about your life. Under the new National Bank. I need to do a bit of that lately.
Can those on Zoom see the screen?
Yep.
Excellent. Okay. Right. So kotahi, you've probably heard the term a number of times today. No. So we do have an enormous challenge in front of us. Essentially, the drivers of change for us within the policy and planning team, which is setting out our work program for the next 10 years, are a number of things. We've had significant changes through central government direction. There have been a number of national policy statements. The one that you're probably most familiar with is around the freshwater management, the National Environmental Standards amendments to the RMA. We also have national planning standards, so that's looking to align all the regional plans and district plans, having some conformity within those between councils, so that the user, the people within our communities, can actually pick up one from, you know, Manawatu or the Hawke's Bay and be looking at a similar product, so they understand that, you know, where they can find the information, the issues, the objectives, policies, roles, etc. A couple of other challenges in front of us within the next few years is that we have to review our Regional Coastal Environment Plan, which we've already talked to this morning, and the Regional Resource Management Plan, which includes the Regional Policy Statement, is also up for review. Both of those are considerably old, and it is high time that we look to amend those or review those. The RMA directs us to do that within 10 years, but because the Regional Resource Management Plan has had a number of plan changes, that's why we haven't undertaken a full review in 2016. We've essentially had iterations of changes to that, but we're looking to review the entire plan. So the purpose of coming to you today is really just to signal to you that we have a work program which is being directed by legislation, by central government direction. We have statutory obligations to respond to those, and we're looking at a solution and how we can deliver this in the most effective way. So this is a bit of a timeline of what's in front of us. So as you can see, we've had a number of national environmental standards and statements and policy statements recently. The biggest driver for us at the moment is the National Policy Statement for Freshwater. So that's requiring us to have all of our freshwater catchment plans notified by December 2024. And that's the red box that you can see in the middle of the screen. So as you know, we've only got Tukituki as an operative freshwater catchment plan within our Regional Resource Management Plan at the moment. Oh, sorry, and this is also just a highlight of what each of the different national policy statements and environmental standards are. So what we can do is provide you with a copy of this. I won't talk to these just now, but it's just highlighting that there's a lot of change and a lot of statements and standards that we have to respond to. The RPC within the Act itself actually directs this committee to oversee the development and review the RMA documents. So one of the functions and powers of this committee is to implement a work program. So it's essential for us to bring this work program to you and hopefully have your endorsement moving forward so that you have a clear strategy and understanding of what we need to deliver and how we're going to do it. So as I mentioned earlier, there have been some changes to the Regional Resource Management Plan since it was made operative in 2006. They're listed there. As you know, Plan Change 7 for outstanding water bodies and tank have both been notified, so they're in the process of, we've received submissions. Outstanding water bodies hearing will be held in December, and tank we're proposing to hold in May of next year. We have a number of constraints to our work program. Naturally, resourcing is an issue that's already been highlighted by Api this morning, and that's not just for this organisation, it's actually resourcing outside of these four walls. We're required under the NPSFM to actively involve iwi in the plan development. So that will require us to have suitable resourcing to enable that to occur in a genuine fashion. Between now and December 24, when we have to have these plans, freshwater plans notified, there's only 20 RPC meetings. So I think that's really important to highlight to this committee, is that whilst the policy and planning team have a lot of work to do, you do too. And we don't have much time to do it, and we don't have many meetings to do it. So there's going to be an expectation on this committee to make decisions within the next few years around these freshwater catchment plans. There's also expectations on the community. We will be engaging with our communities, and we don't have the luxury of time as we have with TANK. As you know, TANK was kick-started in 2012. We finished that process with the community in 2018. We just don't have that time frame available to us anymore. There's going to be pressure on our TLAs as well. They're at various iterations of their plan development, and there will need to be some alignment between their plans and ours, because we will be looking to change the regional policy statement. We'll review it and update it, and the TLAs will need to be aware of that, and we will need to engage with them throughout this process very closely to make sure that they understand the direction that this plan is going in. And there's a bunch of other things. So there are other resourcing and resourcing systems and expertise issues. New Zealand is only a very small country. We only have limited expertise within this country. Planners are very thin on the ground. I'm very lucky that we have a full component within our team now, but we will be looking for more resourcing to actually support us in this endeavour. But that will also require external consultants. It will require systems like GIS. So there are a number of things that we need to have in place, and the funding to support this, to make this, plan run smoothly. And then, look, we don't know what's going to happen. We've had COVID. There's every possibility that there could be another disruption to work programs that just are outside of our control. And then central government changes. We don't know what's going to happen in that space. We know that there's the option being considered in terms of doing away with the Resource Management Act, and we don't know what implications that will have on our work program, but we are keeping a very close eye on that. So that was all slightly doom and gloom, but we see this as being a really good opportunity. So Kotahi, it's a working title at this stage. We have landed on that because it's going to be, what we're proposing is a single plan. So rather than having individual catchment plans go through their separate hearings process and separate notification process, We're looking to have a single regional plan that encompasses the coastal environment plan, the regional resource management plan, the regional policy statement, and looking to incorporate all of those freshwater catchments. So we consider this as a really good opportunity for this council and for our team, and particularly for iwi and the community. Because what we have encountered in the past is that when we're talking with communities just on fresh water, that's very difficult for them to understand as a concept, because it is the environment. It's all interlinked, it's interrelated, particularly for tangata whenua. You can't ring fence just the river and not consider how that might affect the sea. So this really gives us an opportunity to, really give genuine depth to a kia ora ki tai approach to planning. The NPSFM requires us to give effect to Te Manawa Te Wai, and we will be looking to hold a workshop with you all in November, hopefully, with Ricky Allison, and he'll look to facilitate that. And Ricky's going to be an excellent person to talk to you about that, because he's been part of the Kahu Wai Māori group that looked at the development of the NPSFM. So the benefit of this is, like I say, it's not going to be a freshwater focus, so we can consider things like air, natural hazards, and that will help the community with their engagement and their bringing the issues to the table. And I think this slide probably covers a lot of that, but what we will hope to do with the Mohaka plan in terms of that co-design and that partnership is take that as a model and bring this to the other catchments. So we're looking at that true partnership approach with tangata whenua. We will need to obviously engage with our communities as well. That's a given. And as I said, that real kia ora ki tai approach to environmental planning. Within our organisation as well, this has been received very positively, particularly from our science team. The intention is that we will have a policy lead and a science lead and a person from Māori Partnerships who will be focused on engaging with catchments. So we will still be focusing on each of the catchments that haven't had a freshwater plan undertaken already in the first instance. So Mohaka, Wairoa, Esk, Porangahau and the Southern Coast. And by having a lead policy, science and Māori Partnership team, that will give the community, a level of familiarity with HBRC. They'll know who they need to be talking to about their issues. So if they're not in attendance at a meeting, then they know that they have the right emails and contacts and things like that. So it provides us with a better alignment internally, because we're actually breaking down the silos. We're not going to have science up and down. We'll have a science, planning, Māori Partnerships, comms team, and so there'll be better engagement within our teams throughout the organisation. And that will help with resourcing and systems and all of those other challenges that we have. This Kotahi plan will also have good alignment with our climate smart recovery, and equally there will be a climate lens applied throughout the review of this plan, or the development of this plan. Oh, and not to forget that the strategic plan objectives will be at the fore of this. We're not proposing to rewrite or change any of those strategic objectives, but essentially Kotahi will sit alongside that and complement it. So the big question, that probably hasn't come out so well, the how. So as I said, there will be chapters within Kotahi which will look at the format of the national planning standards, but we will also have catchment-specific chapters. So there will still be a Mohaka catchment chapter. There will still be a Tank catchments chapter. In terms of Tank and Tuki, neither of those are MPSFM 2020 aligned or compliant, and the intention is to obviously focus in the first year on those catchments where we haven't undertaken any freshwater catchment planning. But this will enable us to review those two other chapters, if you like, so that by the time we get to notifying the plan, we will have circled round and made them 2020 compliant. So James had a fabulous analogy the other day about the hare and the tortoise. So Tank at the moment is a bit of a tortoise. Kotahi will be the hare when it comes through, and then it'll catch up with the tortoise, and there'll be that synergy there where it realigns, and that we'll have a 2020 compliant Tank chapter. So the aim for us at this stage is to notify this Kotahi plan by August 24, which is earlier than the December date. We've intentionally brought it forward so that we've got a bit of leeway, because we just need to make sure that we're not hanging on to the last minute before we notify. So that will enable this committee an opportunity, if necessary, to revisit any particular item. But hopefully August 24 will be an achievable deadline. Oh, sorry, I have mentioned this already. So yeah, the existing freshwater plan changes, as I said, Mohaka will essentially be our, what was the word you used earlier, Martin? Prototype, pilot, whichever you'd like to call it. So that will hopefully be, the model, the ideal model for our other catchments. And then parts of Tuki and Tank, which are MPSF 2020 compliant, will be ring fenced, but the rest will catch up. I think we've probably covered all of that. So, and in terms of the government's suggestion that we're doing away with the RMA, we're going to keep a very close watch on that and what that might mean for Kotahi, but we're not going to pause what we need to do because we don't have time. I think we have to assume that December 24 will be the deadline regardless of what happens to the RMA in the interim. And I don't see that any legislation changes will happen within the next 12 months anyway. So we should have a fairly good heads up and a bit of lead-in time to any changes that we need to make to the program. I think I've probably covered all of this, but essentially our engagement with the community and with tangata whenua, there will be an intense period of engagement. The first couple of years will be our relationship building opportunity. It will be our chance to listen to our communities, to co-design with tangata whenua. And going back to the resourcing question, Api, we will be seeking resourcing for our team through the LTP. We'll also be seeking financial resourcing through the LTP. Obviously that process, we can't confirm what that will be by the time we've gone through it, but that's certainly something that we have sought to enable us to deliver on our work program. And this is just again that timeline. So this is the period we'll be, kick-starting our, well, we've already started our engagement here with Mohaka, but then 21, this is our opportunity to engage. We'll be collating the science that we have. Then towards the end of that process, we'll be writing and reviewing. And we are looking to hold or pre-notify the plan towards the end of 23, and there's every likelihood that this will be some sort of agile pop-up type of engagement process as well. obviously we will have been engaging with tangata whenua throughout the duration, but in terms of, you know, really mustering that community direct input and engagement, we're looking to do something a little bit different, and holds, you know, these pop-up type consultation events before we look to notify the following year in August. Oh, my mouse has gone mad, sorry. That's it.
Thank you, Kerry.
I've got a little analogy that I think of when I think of this, and it goes something like, this committee and this council will need to do a tuki or a tank each year for the next 4 years. One a year of, you know, pace, scale, resourcing, decision making with our communities. I mean, both of which were sort of 10-year journeys in of themselves in a year. So the workshopping this council will need to do, this committee will need to do, the decisions it will need to make fast, the quantum of engagement with a broad range of stakeholders across the region on so many issues is mammoth.
No problem, James.
Actually, that's probably one thing I didn't mention, was that we will be looking to hold that first workshop in November around Te Manawa Te Wai. And then what we have suggested, because of the time frame and the pressures, is that we would like to have the opportunity to workshop with this committee in advance of every RPC meeting, because so essentially the RPC meetings will be for an entire day, with the first half being a workshop. The workshop that we'd like to hold with you in December will be around the principles that will support this plan development. And then we'll be looking to you for suggestions for other workshops, but we know that this is massive, and there's a lot of new information, there's a lot of new legislation, and so we would like to be your resource to support you to be able to engage in this process and to be supportive of this process, and then ultimately to make the decisions in this process.
Questions anyway?
Kia ora. Yes, we're going to be moving, all right. With what you've just explained and us taking on the Mohaka plan change, are the tangata whenua involved quite aware of these timeframes and all the kotahi plan that has to go alongside, so that they understand in which the speed that we have to move and all the other responsibilities we have with plan changes?
So yes, they are aware of the 24 deadline. Kotahi has not necessarily been discussed in detail with them, because we needed to, for two reasons essentially. We needed to run this proposal through the long-term plan because we need the resourcing to support it, but equally we needed to bring it to this committee as well before we take it further.
I think it's probably a valuable
so it has been
conversation to have at the right time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Api, did you have a question?
Thank you for that report. God bless us all on this journey.
Absolutely.
And I look forward to all of us becoming more comfortable with wearing our underwear on the outside of our pants over the next 4 years, as we're being asked to accomplish some superhuman feats. I guess my first question is that this forum and this table, outside of what you've expressed, Kerry, how we lead, how we work, how we find spaces to be stronger in the way we collaborate, is probably the first place we need to be investing some of our energies, because what we do here, we need to repeat in our catchments. Not to say we haven't been trying to do that to date, just the external pressures put on us by central government require us to put our big boy pants on. So my first, looking forward to what the schedule will look like. This is pretty intensive. The implications around the capacity of the panel to address those collective plans is going to be an interesting ongoing conversation going forward. But the question I have is, to both our iwi members and to our elected members, given the volume of work and the time frame that the Crown has placed upon our regional catchments to be able to get through all of this, is there the appetite at this table to talk with our PSGEs around a collaborative letter to Central Crown and to the government around how we might actually achieve some of these incredible milestones that they're asking us to accomplish over the next 4 years? This is not about the importance of the work. This is actually about being realistic. One, in a post-COVID environment, every LTA is finding it particularly difficult to address the economic changes that are ahead of us. But two, the importance of this work as it's driven by Central Crown seems to be missing the on-the-ground element around how we can provision good spaces for our regulators and our territorial authorities to work in a good collaborative space with not just iwi, but actually our community. So I would be very interested in engaging in a conversation with HBRC and testing the waters with our PSGs and other iwi groups around perhaps a shared letter of expression to the Crown that we are committed to doing the best we can within the time frame provided for us, but that commitment needs to be mirrored by the right amount of resourcing and I guess acknowledgement around the work that has to happen on the grassroots level. While I have absolute confidence in our team and our LTAs to be able to hit the ground running, at a local level, many of our iwi and many of our maraes and many of our smaller communities are not even aware that these items are being discussed at central level. And so for me, the urgency of us to work collaboratively at this table sends a good message to all of our people across Hawke's Bay that we are quite prepared to pull on our big boy pants and lead from the front. But secondly, that the onus of this collective good is something that we are seeking to share with central government in order to achieve these outstanding milestones. And so that's really the question I'd like to put out to our committee, and not too sure when we might get an answer, but I'd love to see that conversation evolve.
Thank you, Api. You are developing a very interesting tactic of giving a speech around your questions, Api.
Thank you. Yeah, I had the same query from a couple of councillors, and I'm rewiring and relearning.
You're following a cue that I'm not that happy with.
But and I'll work on that, Mr. Chair. And for me, it's a part of acknowledging Manaaki and taking a different approach before putting the question forward as a Māori, and I'm having to rewire, so that'll take some time.
I'm happy with Api.
Tanya Hopkins has a question.
Oh, Tanya. Sorry.
There was a question in there.
There was a question. He's following very... Anyway, Tanya.
Kia ora, everyone.
Is it
Thanks,
a question,
Kerry,
Tanya?
for your paper and the presentation. It does fill me with trepidation knowing that the S catchment and Maihapu will be dealing with this expedited journey, as will Wairoa and Central Hawke's Bay. I have some questions, and if you can bear with me. I just wanted to understand on page 36 of our papers, at paragraph 27, Kerry, you've got the deliverables. So we're having to prepare these catchment plan changes ahead of when we thought we would have to, so we get them ready by 2024. But I was just a bit confused by 27.6 and 27.7. Are we expediting work on some plans ahead of when we're required to consolidate effort? Is that what we're doing?
Yes and no. So with regards to the national planning standards and the e-planning, it doesn't make sense for us to, because the national planning standards, looks for us to align the regional policy statement. Dale, remind me the date, is that 25? But anyway, and then the regional plan by 29. So there's a split date there. So what we're actually suggesting is that we're looking to, I suppose, beg forgiveness in this respect, and do it all at once, because it just it seems silly to try and split the plan and make it compliant with the national planning standards just because of their split dates. So
Their dates are misaligned, and because those dates were developed by central government in isolation to the deadlines set for fresh water. But it would be mad to try and hit the 2024 deadline for the fresh water, which is the substance, and then have to then go and redo the form of the plans subsequent to that. You might as well do it in one fell swoop. There's not a significant additional resourcing impost in meeting those targets early.
And equally with the E-plan, a lot of councils have already delivered their E-plan in advance of the 2029 deadline. And it makes sense for us, again, if we're considering all the content of the plan, not to have that available for our communities in an e-planning form, which will enable them to access all of the GIS maps and plans. Because at the moment, the way our Regional Resource Management Plan currently stands, all of those maps are sitting as PDFs and they're not interactive, and it doesn't help anybody understand how they can drill down to, what are the specific issues for where they live or have, an interest.
No, that's helpful. Sorry, I wasn't entirely clear what the E-plan was, but no, that's helpful. So to more substantive matters, there's mention, I think it was in your slide, of something around proactive engagement with tangata whenua and funding. What makes me feel a little bit green is knowing that there's a tight time frame, knowing that tangata whenua are often feeling behind the 8 ball because we're trying to post-settlement examine the issues in our environment and understand what the problems are, and then trying to work out what needs to happen. And there is bringing our people along and doing that, that collection of information, as well as liaising with council. So my first real question here is, are we going to provide detailed timetabling for each of those catchments? I know you were saying in the first year we're going to look at the ones that that haven't been touched yet, like the Esk and Wairoa, and that we're going to spend the first year on that, because that's only a couple of months away. And so what I'm concerned about is the lead-in time to our PSGEs, who are often under-resourced and stretched anyway and have their own annual plans that they've got to deliver. How are we going to manage communicating the timetabling to them, and how detailed is that timetabling going to be? Because they're going to have to move heaven and earth to get themselves ready. And then, so timetabling is one. The second one is the proactive engagement and resourcing. What are we talking about here in terms of resourcing? I think from my perspective, it's really important to resource tangata whenua up front, not late in the piece, so that they can get themselves together to be able to engage effectively. So timetabling and resourcing. And then I want to come back to no new science and what happens if there is no science. So if we could just address the timetabling and the resourcing, please.
So we do need to be very clear with our communication, not just with tangata whenua, with the community in general around the challenges that we have ahead. But yes, specifically with tangata whenua, because if we are looking to have this true partnership in the plan development, then absolutely they need to be fully aware. I think what we have demonstrated through the Mohaka plan is that those conversations in terms of setting out a timetable has to be done at the outset of the engagement, or at the beginning of the relationship, if you like, so that it's also clear for our partners at the table that they understand what those expectations are of them and of their time. I guess for us, that one of the next phases in our co-design process is that we are looking for opportunities where resourcing might be required for that engagement, particularly around understanding what the cultural values are for each of the catchments and how we go about resourcing that, and who might undertake that element of work, whether that's I don't know what that looks like yet, Tanya, but it could be that there may be separate consultants or iwi want to undertake that work themselves or engage with it. We don't know what it looks like yet, but we're fully up for the conversation. We know that there needs to be resourcing to enable, those elements of the work and for the information to inform the plan.
Could I just add, so we have got a resourcing proposal on the table as part of the long-term plan, which we'll be coming back and talking to you about in a bit more detail. Councillors last week asked for us to do some more work around painting the picture of the entirety of the council's investment around engagement with tangata whenua, including the collation of Mātauranga as part of the development of Kotahi and the freshwater planning exercise. So we will be bringing back a picture, and we'll be iteratively discussing with this committee and the Māori Standing Committee the resourcing package for the LTP. Having said that, this is a national conversation, so I had a meeting with the Secretary of the Environment this morning on this very matter, and we have a meeting of the Freshwater Implementation Group that includes the representatives from Kahui Waimāori this afternoon on the implementation package for the freshwater reforms. And what we have said consistently to the Crown as regional councils is that resourcing tangata whenua engagement represents the single biggest challenge and risk around the timetable for delivery. And I think it's fair to say that government has been of the view that the lack of progress on freshwater reform over the last 9 years since the MPS was first promulgated has been from a lack of will by councils to get on with the job. We have consistently said they underestimate the complexity of community engagement, particularly with tangata whenua, and the expectation that we take everybody on the journey with us. And so this new timetable they've set for us is heroic, and it does require there to be resourcing. And so they have committed to developing a national policy statement on engagement with tangata whenua, which they're currently seeking our advice on. And again, the conversation we had this morning was we need the Crown to set these expectations for the timetable and own the timetable. Don't throw it to local government to front. But the Crown also has to come to the party with resourcing at the same time. You can't set a timetable and set both local government and tangata whenua up to fail by not providing the requisite resourcing. So that is going to be the headline message we will be giving to the incoming government, and we've sought an audience with key ministers post-election on that very question.
Thank you.
So thanks, James. In terms of funding, though, we as a council do fund research or work by tangata whenua groups to help inform development of plans,
Yes.
and we budget for that.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so we have got a proposal to expand that as part of the long-term plan. But whether it's sufficient remains to be seen, and we'd certainly like to see it leveraging Crown funding as well.
That picks up on Api's point, which I think is a really good suggestion, Api, that we do a joint letter. It would be a very powerful letter to government if all the councillors signed it, or the council and the treaty group signed it saying, hey, we need a hand here. I think it would be very powerful. Tani,
Yeah, so sorry, just to follow up on that. So essentially, we're bringing forward quite a number of years' work into a condensed time frame. It required, in my view, still the amount of funding that you would have expected. There might be, I don't know if there would be savings really. I just think there's work to be done. And this leads me to my next point around that there will be no new science.
That's right.
This worries me because how are we going to make informed decisions on our plans and fulfil our obligations if in some cases we don't have any information because we don't have the time to do the science? And this also relates to the Mātauranga Māori. Gathering in Mātauranga Māori, as you all know, is not a matter of doing some desktop researching. This is taking time, having hui, talking to whānau. It's an intensive process and is costly, but it definitely takes time. So what do we do with no new science if there is no science in some of these areas and our science is lacking And what do we do about gathering in Mātauranga Māori?
So the term no new science essentially means that we won't be looking to do anything over and above our sort of business as usual. So the science team will still be working on the state of environment reporting and all of the normal science business. But as we found with the tank process is that the policy stalled because we were waiting on the science, and then the science caught up, and then we reinitiated the policy development, and then we ran through scenario after scenario after scenario on things. And I think really what this is relating to is trying to say is that we're not going to have, again, that luxury to be developing the science as we go through the policy. So if we uncover that there is a requirement for a new science project, we will timetable that beyond this next LTP period. So, sorry, the next 3-year period, so 2024. So it will be highlighting what needs to be done in the future, but it won't be looking to establish any new research programs or new modelling of whatever within the planned development period.
And we are looking at funding, increasing our funding for the collation of Mātauranga to feed in. That will obviously draw on existing and traditional knowledge. But look, in terms of the new science, the really important point I think we've got to collectively get our heads around is there will be gaps in information. And just as we had with tank, we will have to make adaptive management decisions that will play out over time. And the great example is around the debate over 80 million or 90 million or 70 million limit on extraction from the aquifer, because we had gaps in our knowledge about precisely how much water is taken. And so we set up an adaptive management regime. And that's been a very difficult thing for people to accept. And I think what we're going to have to understand is working on at this pace and scale means that there'll be lots of areas where we'll have to just make judgment calls. We won't know for sure, and we'll have to monitor and adapt over time. And the problem we've got into historically with these plan changes is everybody fights them like that's the very last time you're going to make a decision on the resource. And it's all or nothing. And we've got to get more comfortable with the idea that 80% is good enough, or that we're going to make judgment calls on the fly, and then we're going to monitor and adapt over time. And the plan will be reviewed, and if we're getting it wrong, we can pull other levers. But trying to get perfection will be the death knell of this whole process.
Thank you, James. We're out of time. Now, do I have someone to move this, that we receive this, please?
Well, I'd like to move that we receive the report and support the direction contained in it. Just to receive and note means there's nothing, it's everything, but I think we should receive the report and support the direction of it, not agreeing to all the details, but the general direction of it, we support that.
Is everyone happy with that? You'll second that? Okay, that's the amendment. Rick, do you wish to speak to it?
Just to say briefly, if I can, look, Chair, we have to get with this. This committee has to start becoming a decision-making body, not a debating group. This is, in actual fact, a decision-making body, really, but we get ourselves into having so many debates, and we're just going to have to change, in my view, our attitude to this. The second thing I just want to say is that we have, for a long time, people have complained about the degradation of our waterways, and everybody says they're not good enough, and they're not. And we are now challenged to have a plan to correct that within 4 years. We should be celebrating that. Celebrating it, not complaining that we're going to have to do some work. Goodness gracious me. So on the one hand, we're complaining about it, and then when someone says, well, do it, we're complaining about that. Look, let's get on and do it. As for the science, I have this thing. Look, let's just, we know what this thing is. We have the science is there. We know as much as we have. Personal knowledge, we know what the problems are. We do. And we know to a high degree of accuracy what the solutions are. So let's just proceed on the basis of what our science tells us, our personal knowledge tells us, and say, this is good enough for decision making. We have to make a decision rapidly to improve the quality of our waterways. And I think the direction of this is fine. I support it. I think in actual fact it's too long. Personally, I'd like to do it next week because we need to act. So I'm very
Thank
happy.
you, Rick. I'm in that camp too. Martin?
Nothing further to add.
Nothing further to add to that.
Chair, can I just make a comment?
Yes, certainly.
I want to thank you for the presentation. I did have some doubts. The questions asked and response gave clarity. And I actually like robust discussions because it's those robust discussions that enables me to make an informed decision. So, thank you.
Thank you, Tania. Any other speakers? Want to put the motion? All those in favour? Aye. Against? It's unanimous. Thank you. And now, you've only got 25 minutes for lunch. I know the union will complain, but we...
I'll see you in 30 minutes' time.